So feeding positions. First of all, feeding volume, because Amy had asked when she first got here, we said, how much is the baby feeding? She goes, she's still taking 40, but I don't know like if she needs more, wants more, right? So I think like when you guys are in the NICU and you come in every week and as your volumes get increased and you come in and you're like, oh great, my baby took the extra 10 volume or whatnot, you know how much they're supposed to take, right? And then they'll say, oh, he didn't take all of his feeding, we gavage the rest, whatever. So you kind of get used to that. So when you go home, how do you know how much to give, right? I don't know, Caroline, maybe you can add to it. If a baby's discharged on 40 cc's volume, when should the baby be taking more volume?
So it's just like what we do in the NICU. There are some of us physicians who will be increasing the feedings every 2 to 3 days, and then there's some who will just let it go a week. You'll be on the same volume, and then they'll jump into a huge different volume. So it's going to be kind of the same thing when you're at home. As you gain weight, the baby should take more. So what we expect physiologically, or what we want to see, is that every day the baby is going to gain 1 ounce. And so, as you know from the NICU, where we weigh the baby every single day, we can gain half an ounce, or we can gain 1.5 ounces, or, so over the course of the week, we hope that the baby will gain 1 ounce a day. But each day is variable day to day. So what I would say is that as the baby's gaining weight, I would probably reevaluate the volumes every 1 to 2 weeks. That's probably more realistic than every couple of days being like, oh, did you gain 3 ounces? Maybe I should give you 5 more cc's or something like that. That'll make you crazy. I think in general, as the baby's gaining weight and you can feel, it gets harder and harder, your arms get more and more tired, as you can feel that the baby's actually gaining weight, then give them a little bit more. So if you went home on 40, and you've been home now on 2 weeks on 40, then maybe it's time that they start to take 50 or even 60, so that kind of a thing. So I would give it 2 weeks of the same volume and think about going up a little bit more. But I will say that where they're at in their gestational ages is where they're getting to be a little more mature. So I'm sure you remember when they were first in the NICU, they were more like preemies and they weren't doing much, and now that they're past that kind of preemie age and they're more in the full term range, that they seem more mature, right? Do you understand what I mean when I say that? Is that they kind of get it. They're eating a little bit better than they were. They're a little bit more mature. So they also can self-regulate a little bit. They'll know when they've kind of had enough. So you feed them their 40, and then if the baby seems like they're still awake and looking around, okay, maybe you need a little bit more, to top you off, that kind of a thing. So there's no hard and fast rule about it, but you kind of got to just sense what your baby wants. And then if they still seem interested, they maybe want more.
And also because in the NICU, we have them on such a schedule, right? And babies love schedules. They really do. So when you go home, for us, Jenny can attest to this, especially babies who are bigger and feed a lot, and they don't sleep. They'll wake up after 2 hours.
So when we talk about nutrition, which we'll talk about later, the premature formulas have more protein in them, because protein is what you need to grow. But protein is also what gives you gas, and protein is what makes your tummy uncomfortable. And so we try and give as much protein as we can, but also balancing comfort. So the Enfamil NeuroPro has less protein in it, which is fine, especially if the trade-off is decreased reflux. But it's the protein aspect of it that it causes the discomfort.
You guys probably all learned how to feed in the NICU. Some babies like to be swaddled when they feed, some don't. Some babies like to grab onto something when they feed. You learn how your baby likes to feed. One thing we really want to point out, and we try to teach in the NICU, is that you really want to make sure that the baby's airway is open like this, right? A lot of parents, when they tend to feed like this, and the baby's airway will be like this, right? Because they're comfortable, they get comfortable. So we like to keep their airway back. Let me swaddle the baby too, so you can see. Of course, never prop a bottle in a boppy or anything, right? But you can use a boppy for positioning, and it's a good positioner for feeding also. Just make sure the airway's back. There's also a difference in feeding, like if you don't feel like they're feeding that, like having that great of a feed. And I don't know how to explain this other than to just show you, but there's a difference between feeding a baby like this and feeding a baby like this. Do you see what I mean? If you just kind of like lift the back of the neck area up, it kind of like wakes them up, and you'll see it all the time in the NICU. They'll be like, oh, now I have to feed, right, Jenny? Burping, same thing. Just you can leave the baby in the same position, and then just kind of, you did good. You did good feeding in the NICU, yeah. Nipples. Slow flow. Still using it? Yeah?
I am.
Regular flow. We don't like slow flows.
I've never tried a regular flow.
So I feel like OTPT, you know, at first when OTPT comes and assesses everything, of course they have to see how the baby's suck is, all that. And they always start the babies on these really slow flow nipples. And I think initially they wanted to start with those for breastfeeding as well because they felt like it was kind of the same flow. And they sit there and they'll play with the lips until they're ready. If you put this bottle in a baby's mouth, now if the baby needs pacing, it might be a little too much for her. But the slow flows, we feel like makes them work harder and makes them more tired. I don't know. I think Caroline agrees.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's frustrating because they'll come and they'll say, oh, so you're still using a slow flow, correct?
I am. Like 15 days out of NICU, I'm like, when is a good time to switch?
So I think you can switch to a standard nipple.
Okay.
But again, like we talked about earlier, I would pace her. I would maybe start her left side lying and pace her a little bit, how you did. But you know, the Dr. Browns, they'll start with the Dr. Browns and preemie, newborn, extra, ultra preemie. I mean, it's confusing to parents because sometimes they'll come in and they'll see a nurse feeding with this nipple, right?
Of course.
So I think a standard nipple is fine. You don't have to sit there and wait for the baby to cue, put it in the baby's mouth. The baby's gonna feed if it's hungry.
Totally.
Yeah. Why is my baby crying? So all babies cry. Caroline talked about a little bit. Some babies may cry more than others because of the reflux and they're uncomfortable. Excessive crying can burn calories, affect feeding, and alter sleep cycles. So you do not want to just let your baby cry. We try not to do that in the NICU, but again, if your baby isn't crying and just sleeping for long periods of time, still always wake them up to feed. If your baby isn't feeding well, if you notice your baby has no interest in feeding, that's usually a good indicator or a first sign that something might be wrong. Baby might be getting sick, if they're lethargic. That's one of the first things we look for. Oh, the visitors during flu RSV season, and Caroline will talk more about that too. It's here. Everybody's sick. You know, we would recommend everyone having their vaccines, whooping cough, all of that, flu shot. Don't be afraid to say no, if you know you have to. Educate friends and family on hygiene, washing their hands. In the NICU, you're so used to Purell. If you guys have like bottles of Purell probably all over the house, don't get crazy with it.